Welcome to our Week 11 Explainer. Today, we're tackling something absolutely crucial, designing evaluation frameworks. But, instead of getting bogged down in just dry data and spreadsheets, we're going to look at this through a different lens. We're going to use a metaphor, building a house. Let's dive in and see exactly how to draft the perfect architectural blueprint for your next big project.
So here's the fundamental question we always have to answer. Imagine spending millions of dollars and honestly years of effort on a massive public sector project. How do we actually know if it worked? Right? We can't just guess. An evaluation isn't just some afterthought you slap on at the end of a project just to check a box. It's literally the DNA of project accountability and continuous learning. It's how we figure out the real merit, worth, and significance of what we're doing.
Think of this evaluation framework as your master blueprint. Just as an architect wouldn't dream of building a skyscraper without a highly detailed plan, a public sector manager shouldn't launch a program without this framework in place. It lays out exactly how your data is going to be collected, aggregated, and analyzed on a routine basis. Why? So you can form accurate, evidence-based judgments about a program's true value.
Here's our agenda for today's explainer. We'll start with the evaluation blueprint. Move into framing core questions, look at methods, criteria, and indicators, then engaging key stakeholders, and wrap up with communicating for impact.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the evaluation blueprint.
To get a solid, empirically based system off the ground, you actually need to define 4 constituent elements. First up is the scope. Basically, what specific parts of the intervention are we even looking at? Second is the institutional framework. Who's participating and what rules govern them? Third, we have the operational framework, which is just asking, how are the daily mechanics actually going to work? And finally, the technical framework. What specific methodologies and tools are we going to use to grab our data?
Now, here's a crucial takeaway. A really good framework balances hard data with the actual perspectives of the people involved. Because at the end of the day, you're evaluating human behavior, not just crunching a bunch of numbers in a vacuum. Putting this framework together means navigating some pretty complex public policies and messy real-world environments. You've got to synthesize totally different types of evidence and include different worldviews to get the true picture of performance.
Moving right along to Section 2, framing core questions. When you're designing your framework, your questions really shouldn't just be random curiosities. Ideally, you want to evaluate the project against standard domains set by the OECD DAC. That's the Development Assistance Committee. This makes sure your assessment is totally comprehensive. Think about it like this. Are we doing the right things? That's relevance. How well does the intervention fit? Coherence. Are we actually achieving our objectives? That's effectiveness. How well are we using our resources? Efficiency. What real difference does the intervention make? Impact. And finally, will these benefits actually last? Sustainability.
Okay, let's look at Section 3, methods, criteria, and indicators.
When it comes to linking your questions to your methodologies, you really want to embrace a mixed methods approach. For instance, if we want to know about the human experience, testing for relevance, we lean on qualitative focus groups. But if we're trying to track resource allocation for efficiency, well, we need hard, quantitative financial audits. Blending these approaches is how you build a totally robust, multi-layered blueprint.
But as you're building out this blueprint, you've always got to remember the so what check. Look, gathering incredibly expensive data that's never going to be used is just as bad as ignoring data entirely. You absolutely must keep your evaluation costs proportional to the overall cost of the initiative itself. The rule of thumb here is value for money. Spend exactly what's needed to gain the desired information, but not a penny more. If a simple survey gets you the actionable data you need, please don't commission a massive multi-year randomized control trial.
This brings us perfectly to Section 4, engaging key stakeholders. To truly evaluate a program, you need a wide diversity of perspectives. At the top, you've got policymakers and funders, right? They need to know if their investment actually paid off. Then you have program managers and deliverers who know all the operational realities and on-the-ground constraints. And crucially, you have the program beneficiaries. Designing an evaluation without them is literally like an architect forgetting to add doors because they just never bothered to ask the client how they plan to get inside. The beneficiaries provide a massive reality check on your whole process. You also need to figure out exactly when to bring these stakeholders into the fold. Spoiler alert, you don't just call them at the end when the final report is already printed. You want to engage them early during a participatory scoping workshop to build the program theory. You consult them when drafting the core questions so you know you're asking the right things. And you maintain that engagement all the way through data collection and final reporting. It's really a continuous loop of collaboration.
But here is a very serious word of caution. Are you genuinely listening to them?
If stakeholders are going to trust the information, take ownership of the findings, and actually use the lessons learned, you must include them as active, real partners. Pretending to listen, or just holding some token town hall meeting to check a box is incredibly dangerous. Creating a mere facade of involvement, that's a surefire way to generate deep hostility and resentment, which can totally derail your entire project.
And finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Communicating for Impact. This evaluation cycle perfectly captures the synthesis phase. Notice how we move step by step here. First, we gather raw data from our various methods. Then, that data gets cleaned and organized into descriptive findings. From there, we synthesize and interpret those findings to reach concrete conclusions about the program's merit. But hey, it doesn't stop there. Those conclusions must lead directly to actionable recommendations for stakeholders to improve future performance. If you break this chain anywhere, the evaluation honestly fails its primary purpose.
Treating your communication strategy as a last-minute afterthought is a massive failure. I mean, we've all seen it, right? Some unread 500-page technical report just gathering dust on a manager's desk, that is completely useless. Good dissemination means tailoring accessible formats to very specific audiences. A frontline worker might really benefit from an interactive seminar, whereas a super busy minister might only have time to glance at a one-page infographic or a really crisp policy brief.
By sticking to these best practices, you can make sure your evaluation actually achieves its goals. First, know your audience and speak their language, so absolutely drop the heavy academic jargon. You should also strive to make your findings public by default. It's just the best way to foster true transparency. And honestly, perhaps most importantly, establish formal mechanisms for decision-makers to respond to the results. You've got to assign responsibilities for implementing the recommendations you've worked so incredibly hard to develop.
I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on as you go out and design these systems. An evaluation is only as good as the action it inspires. Period. Data is just a tool, but the architectural framework you build around it decides how that tool is actually going to change the world. Thanks for joining me for this week's Explainer. Now go out there and build something great.